Today, we turn our attention to the pivotal years of the Federalist era, a foundational period that shaped the political, economic, and diplomatic contours of the early United States. Spanning from roughly 1789 to 1801, this era witnessed the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams and the emergence of a national identity still grappling with the challenges of independence. We'll begin by examining the presidency of George Washington, whose leadership and precedence in office established enduring principles for the American executive branch. From the formation of a new federal government to the domestic and foreign challenges that tested his leadership, such as the Whiskey Rebellion and the neutrality debates, Washington's 2 terms laid the groundwork for the presidency's future role and authority. Next, we'll explore the administration of John Adams, whose tenure was marked by rising partisan tensions and the difficult balancing act of safeguarding American sovereignty in the face of European conflicts. The Alien and Sedition Acts, the quasi-war with France, and the fierce rivalry between Federalist and Democratic Republicans defined this turbulent period, revealing the fragile foundations of American democracy. By tracing these 2 presidencies and the evolving debates between Federalists and their opponents, we'll gain deeper insight into how this period shaped the political landscape of the new republic and laid the groundwork for future conflicts and compromises in American history. In the aftermath of the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1788, the young nation faced daunting challenges. The national government under the Articles of Confederation had been weak, lacking the authority to tax or enforce laws. Now, under the new constitutional framework, it fell to the first president and his advisors to put these abstract principles into practice and ensure the stability of the new republic. The Congress that assembled in New York from 1789 to 91 faced a challenge scarcely less daunting than that of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. It had to give form and substance to the framework of the new national government as outlined in the Constitution. Executive departments had to be established, a federal judiciary organized, sources of revenue found, terms of international trade and foreign policy worked out, and a commitment to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution had to be honored. Now, let's go back in time to the election of George Washington on February 4th of 1789. Electors from all of the states that had ratified the Constitution met in their state capitals, and they unanimously selected Washington to be the nation's first president. It is the only time in American history that this has happened, and John Adams, another prominent revolutionary leader, received half the number of votes and became the vice president. Now, the nation celebrated Washington's election in this grand style. He traveled from his home at Mount Vernon in Virginia to the site of his inauguration in New York City, and many towns erected triumphal arches. The first problem for Washington and Congress was to decide just how the chief executive of the new republic should be addressed. In a debate that tied up Congress for a month, the more democratically minded members of the House argued that a title like His Highness smacked of monarchical rule. John Adams, another Federalist, grudgingly agreed to accept Mr. President, but whatever his title, Washington was intent on surrounding the presidency in a halo of respectability, and he set down guidelines for presidential etiquette. He established strict rules for his interactions with the public and met with visitors twice a week for an hour. He bowed with Republican deference to the people, but refused to shake hands. Washington traveled outside New York in a luxurious coach pulled by 6 horses, and at all times he carried himself with a stern reserve. Meanwhile, Congress got down to business. James Madison, now a representative from Virginia, early emerged as the most forceful leader in the House of Representatives. To allay the fears of anti-Federalists that the Constitution granted too much power to the national government, the Federalists had promised to consider amendments that protected both individual rights and liberties and the rights of states. But Madison, concerned not to have the new government immediately hobbled by concessions, to states astutely kept the focus of the amendments on personal liberties. Madison submitted 19 amendments, and Congress soon settled on 12. 10 of those amendments are known collectively as the Bill of Rights and were ratified by the states and became part of the Constitution as of December 15, 1791. The Bill of Rights has been one of the most enduring legacies of the first Congress. The first 8 amendments are concerned mostly with individual rights, as you can see here. They guarantee religious freedom, freedom of expression, and the safeguarding of individuals and their property against arbitrary legal proceedings. Only 3 amendments speak of state interests, citing the necessity of a well-regulated militia for the security of a free state. The Second Amendment guarantees the right of people to keep and bear arms. The 9th and 10th Amendment stipulated that the powers not granted to the national government in the Constitution are retained by the people and by the states. The Bill of Rights broadened the government's base to popular support. Once Congress submitted the amendments to the states for ratification, North Carolina in 1789 and Rhode Island in 1790 overcame their lingering objections and joined the Union. The Bill of Rights also assured Americans that the central government would not try to impose on them a uniform national culture. In the summer of 1789, Congress authorized the first executive departments: the State Department for Foreign Affairs, the Treasury for Finances, and the War Department for the nation's defense. These departments already existed under the Articles of Confederation, and the only debate about them concerned the extent of presidential control over the officials who would head them. The Constitution was silent on whether or not the president could dismiss an official without the Senate's consent. Congress decided that the president could do so, setting an important precedent that bolstered presidential power. Department heads would now be closely bound to the president. As a group that would evolve into the cabinet, the president's chief advisory body for his presidential cabinet, Washington assembled an impressive group of leaders who had distinguished themselves in American public life. Henry Knox, the first Secretary of War, was a leading general, and his eventual successor, Edmund Randolph, was the new Attorney General, and he had introduced the Virginia Plan in the Constitutional Convention. Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, had been the primary author of the Declaration of Independence and the first American minister to France. The first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, had been one of the co-authors of the Federalist Papers, along with John Jay, who became the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Although none of these men had been anti-Federalist, Washington's choices cut across a wide section of the political spectrum, with Hamilton representing the extreme nationalist position and Jefferson far more sympathetic to state power. In addition to creating these new departments, the government sought to figure out the exact role of the judicial branch. The Constitution called for one Supreme Court, but they left it to Congress to authorize lower federal courts. The Judiciary Act of 1789 established a Supreme Court with one Chief Justice and also 5 associates. As I mentioned previously, the first Chief Justice was John Jay, who had helped to write the Federalist Papers. The Judiciary Act also provided for a system of 13 district courts and 3 circuit courts of appeal, and it established the office of the Attorney General. So this Judiciary Act really represented a compromise, and it balanced both the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist concerns, as cases about the Constitution were first heard in the state courts, and then in the highest court, the Supreme Court, was eventually empowered to rule on the constitutionality of the decisions that were made by the state courts, if it was needed. So in this way, people who were worried about the role of a strong centralized government were having their fears assuaged, because they knew that the states would also have some power. The act also included a fatal provision which becomes really important in American history. The law stated that the Supreme Court could force presidential appointments of judges. This law is eventually overturned. When we talk about Jefferson's presidency, we're going to talk about the court case of Marbury v. Madison, and it will become really this defining part of the legacy of both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. During ratification of the Constitution, Anti-Federalists had expressed fear that the Constitution would create a large, expansive government with a vast bureaucracy. In reality, the federal government was far less imposing. Scattered among buildings near New York City's Wall Street, the temporary home of the new government, the government offices bore slight resemblance to the nightmare the Anti-Federalists had predicted. The scale of the new government was modest, and its bureaucracy was small, with only 350 officers. Jefferson's State Department employed 2 clerks, 2 assistants, and a part-time translator. In comparison, the modern State Department employs 8,000 people in Washington, D.C., and 11,000 overseas. The largest department was Alexander Hamilton's Treasury. Within a year of its creation, it boasted nearly 10 times the number of employees of the Department of State. Its budget was more than triple the combined budgets of the State and War Departments. Apart from his close relationship to George Washington, his role as Secretary of the Treasury ensured that Hamilton was a figure to be reckoned with in the new government.